Hi, I'm Ryan. I work for Lamp Magazine, and this is Lamp Reviews. Today, I'll be reviewing this book, People Mover, by John David Card. Warning, this video contains spoilers. Card is a notable character among the cast of myriad authors that hail from Lit, and from my perspective, most distinctly notable for shilling his novella on 4chan's literature board, with an active zeal anywhere from 2021 to 2023. And often, as far as I can tell, aggregating indexes of Lit memorabilia, creating lists, archives, and sometimes showing up by name in threads on Lit dedicated to the exploration of the board's outsider homebrew literature. Card himself notwithstanding, I think People Mover is actually most notable for being published during a very specific period of creative productivity in this very niche circle. Of course, all in the effervescent sheen of the coronavirus. And more interesting than the book yet, the well-spoken young author himself continues wholesale in his dedication to the churn, musing on any of a crazy number of mundane respects, including counting out loud, up to 40,000 so far, I think. John David Card is naturally a little bit of a meme, though with respect to his body of work, on YouTube at least, although respective of a desire for irreverent notoriety, is varied enough to feel constant from then until now, and from the perspective of somebody for whom an interest in the naturally unremarkable, specifically within Lit, comes so naturally. Apparently, the impression that the author has left is no doubt indelible, scratched onto the scene like picnic table vandalism. John David Card treks onward, taking up space, and sufficiently outpacing most creatives, at least on YouTube, in terms of volume. His debut novel, and at the time of this recording his only novel, is regrettably not reflective of the caliber of straight talk of which I know he's capable, easily. But to know the hallows of Lit, of course, is to know Card and his work, and he has made certain to be prolific enough to make a caricature by way of much gnashing, at least on YouTube, crabs in this bucket, a fate any author willing to risk his reputation on 4chan will know well to suffer, and for good reason. Card treks onward, despite the noise, despite the hand-wavy dismissals, onward into the obscure self-reflective world of the outsider artist. And as such, in any case, his talent, if not itself reflective of the disconnect between the brain and the mind, then perfectly rendered in the tradition of outsider artists, as oft, and for lack of a better term, hot garbage. Without the hot. Cringe punk, maybe, without the punk. John David Card's website is admittedly awesome, at least aesthetically. Card is an important figure in that scene, and I have every confidence in him to continue doing what he is doing, whatever he is doing, of course, with respect to his efforts, his very friendly and inclusive disposition notwithstanding, a review of his novella, People Mover. And the first thing I notice is the format. The interior looks like the result of a broken PDF. There are some awkward spaces around chapters that suggest the editor did little, if any, formatting specifically for this trim size, 6x9. The typeface is too large. The book could be much smaller. The font is totally inappropriate. Open sans, I think. Serifs are generally fundamental for paperback. The cover is cool, I think, with the map and the war medal leaf, maybe. Little eagle bird thing. My copy of People Mover has a hole burnt into the cover, probably a cigarette. The book's colophon curiously asserts the author's moral rights and includes a land acknowledgement. Card is Australian, I believe. However, People Mover takes place largely along the Canadian-American border. This book is about a 12-year-old girl, Helen, who decides to take the last material memories of her beloved grandfather, war hero, to the Alaskan range, Mount Fairweather. His death, though years prior, still rings constantly as she meanwhile escapes the abusive clutches of her meth cook parents. That's right. The fated possession of .50 caliber Desert Eagle, that very same metal that shed the blood of our protagonist's primary motivator. The Desi, as she refers to it, accompanies the narrative throughout the book and is the object around which the plot of People Mover is chiefly based. That's right, the 12-year-old girl protagonist carries a handgun and runs away from home. She moves like a drifter toward the Canadian border, manipulating and at times abducting grown truck drivers who are otherwise completely vulnerable to her hypnotic whining, all the while mulling over her general contempt for lesser minds and weighing great consideration with regards to when, where, how, why, or even if she will use this weapon against somebody. Helen quickly coerces a trucker to smuggle her across the Canadian border on his route and, with some classy Mary Sue mechanics, gets the best of the border agents by way of some forged documents and social engineering. Once in Canada, her hostage turned gleeful road companion brings her to Calgary, where she catches a flight to her final destination. Finally, our hero consecrates the mountain with the medal, gifting us with the final piece of the puzzle, the identity of her grandfather, before she walks off into the sunset like the profound and noble troubadour, still moving. And in the end, if I had to figure out some sort of deeper theme to this book, it would be the idea in plain sight. The journey, the trip, the movement itself. Rarely in the narrative is Helen stationary. She moves. People mover. The bulk of the story comprises dialogue, often between Helen and whomever she's accosting. The story behind this book is kind of interesting. I think it has potential. A kid with a gun. I was really looking forward to the kid blasting some poor trucker in the face or something, but it doesn't happen. And unfortunately, People Mover has some fundamental issues, some dysfunction at its core that, rather than rooting for the anti-hero, compels the reader to instead imagine their own story. Yes, I am officially upset that Helen did not empty the Desi into a bunch of cops or kids or whatever. Honestly. Oh well. I guess it's time to finally address the elephant in the room. People Mover is very poorly written. Typos notwithstanding, awkward grammar and fragmented sentences, the colloquial and idiomatic narrative voice really screams amateur. Consider this use of the adverbial intensifier "oh so" in the context of a sentence fragment. And another prospective truck with which to go already pulling up where her previous chauffeur had been oh so briefly parked. And with a shooting stance achieved through years of rigorous GCPD training and the sort of dominant hero complex you so often need to be a cop, Lieutenant Scott Kanzer walked into the Baronhurst household very alertly. Okay, so the PDF online includes the turn of phrase here as well, but my physical has it edited in chapter 17, oh so often to so often. Okay. So don't get me wrong, obviously Card can claim that these are stylistic choices, that the narration is a stream of consciousness and less formal than average, no problem. Comes across as amateur. The paragraphs are too short, notwithstanding the irregular spacing, often just a single line, which when overused has the opposite effect of being dramatic, which is what he's going for, I believe. It's just funny, I understand. Again, stylistically, the author is going for something exciting, something staccato, but it doesn't execute properly and it comes across as amateur. I'll get to the dialogue in a moment, which at its heart reflects the absurdity of the plot. But first, the dominant shortcoming of this book's prose, and the reason why it reads so clumsily, is that it is telling and never showing, or at least very seldom showing me what is happening in the minds of the characters by allowing the action in the scene to do the work. People Mover should have been first person. The entire narrative spoon feeds you all the characters' thoughts in the context of all the other fatal flaws of the narration. It just gets messy. The dialogue, I will admit, is written technically enough, however, because the story is largely dialogue. The dialogue therefore reflects the majority of the plot, and the plot is absolutely ridiculous. I won't go too deep here because there are more interesting things to say, but the story being told here is totally preposterous. In short, a young girl masterminds her way across thousands of kilometers, playing the adults around her like pawns, all the while cursing them with an edgy smarm that really opens up the reader to the smug fantasy that the author had in mind. Author Zulu Alitspa noted that the narrative suggests that Card might enjoy the power dynamic of pointing a gun at somebody. I agree. All in all, it's pretty stupid. which itself shouldn't be an issue, but the novella isn't a comedy. People Mover should have been a comedy. And herein lies the most interesting part of People Mover, to me. It's looking at these works sometimes through the lens of outsider art, which I am often willing to do to an extent. The benefit here would be twofold: that the technical shortcomings of the work are rationalized, and that the artist is exalted as a savant, though, unfortunately for almost all self-published authors, the bar, even for outsider artists, is very high. And what then? Thus, of course, outsider artists comprise the subject of the discussion more than the art itself. Luckily for us, the author has made himself very readily available for scrutiny, and herein lies the real art, the performance art, that is John David Card. You see, John David Card is not an independent author, historian, YouTuber, and anarchist organizer. He is a character being played by a man of the same name. Card would have you take him stone-faced, dead in the eyes, as serious as it gets, and serious, he would have you take him seriously. He mentions to Unreal Press in an interview with Labuschagne, something that I made a whole video about. Having good taste as a writer is a talent, and very strongly reflects your ability as a reader. And this is why being forced to study literature makes you a better writer, simply by making you accustomed to a standard of quality. Card argues that good writers have an inherent knowledge of what makes good writing good, and although he's not wrong, he's on the bottom of the curve. He also claims that the proceeds from the sales of People Mover were substantial enough to fund a move to a different city, and implies pretty strongly that he earned a comfortable provision from his debut novel, which of course is total horseshit. People Mover has one of the lowest Amazon bestsellers ranks of all the books from Lit. The book itself became a lower bound benchmark for the web project I built, the leaderboard. Here's an archive post of me challenging anybody to post a book with fewer sales. And zero shade to Card, like I said, it's all an act. It's all a bit, and a very dedicated role, and that I appreciate. The act itself comes along with having such a public-facing persona, mind you. It's very hard to shill your novel on 4chan without becoming a bit of a lolcow. And Card has wrapped himself tightly in layers of pseudo-intellectualist posturing just to deflect the haters. And let me be clear, I am not a hater. I first read People Mover in 2023, and then twice for this review, so 3 times. I've read Card's other work, online journalistic work, and it's much better than this, despite its issues. People Mover is an easy read, and doesn't require a lot of mental or emotional investment. And this book is relatively old as well as his first novel. I'll probably end up saying this a lot in the future, but sometimes as a writer, you just need to get your first novel out of the way. Self-published debut novels often have all the cool words that you want to use to make sure everyone knows how smart you are. Debut novels often have all the shortcomings of a writer who are more interested in being an author than really practicing something with integrity. And because writing is so universal an undertaking, the competition among the market so democratized, the price to admission so low, I suggest to Card, write another book and let this one stand. Move on. You are better than this one book, and I hope to see you continue. And continue he shall, a fact well noted. Card himself is almost unstoppable as an artist of sorts, and has been shilling himself for years. A dedicated role. I look forward to seeing his inevitable improvement. Shine on, you crazy diamond. And if you don't already know, I score these books according to a system: red, yellow, green, blue. Watch this video to learn more about that. For its rather shabby design and formatting, for its blatantly amateur writing, and ultimately for its shameless, outrageous plot, I award People Mover by John David Card the red. It's bad, man. I don't recommend it. However, I do recommend owning a copy of it on account of its rarity. Naturally, an enormous shout out to John David Card, the man, the legend. Please check out his links in the description and follow him on YouTube. Also, peripheral shoutouts to Labuschagne and Zulu Alitspa for mining lore before me. I'm on your shoulders. The link to their interview on behalf of Unreal Press is also in the description.
And major props to Lucas Bineville for reading this whole book aloud for the audiobook. Great job, in my opinion. Thanks, everyone, for watching. See you soon.